evening, my dear children. I hope you all are safe and sound. Today, I'll be teaching you a new chapter from First Flight, chapter number 2, Nelson Mandela Long Walk to Freedom. As you all know, Nelson Mandela was the first black president of South Africa, elected after time in prison for his anti-apartheid work. Nelson Mandela was a social rights activist, politician, and philanthropist who became South Africa's first black president from the year 1994 to 1999. Now, after becoming involved in the anti-apartheid movement in his 20s, Mandela joined the African National Congress in the year 1942. For almost 20 years, he directed a campaign of peaceful, non-violent defiance against the South African government and its racist policies. Beginning in the year 1962, Mandela spent almost 27 years in prison for political offences. In the year 1993, Mandela and South African President F.W.D. Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to dismantle the country's apartheid system. For generations to come, Mandela will be a source of inspiration for civil rights activists worldwide. Mandela received more than 260 awards over 40 years, most notably the Nobel Peace Prize in the year 1993. From 1994 to 1999, Mandela was President of South Africa. He was the first such African to be elected in fully representative democratic polls. This chapter is an extract from the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, the first black president of South Africa. Now, this chapter, Long Walk to Freedom, it includes description of the inauguration ceremony, citations from his speech, his journey to being a freedom fighter, the struggle along with a tribute to other freedom fighters, and countless other people who fought for their freedom. In South Africa, a brutal practice named apartheid was followed. Now, apartheid, it refers to the discrimination between people on the basis of their race. It was one of the most brutal societies where dark-skinned people were deprived of their basic rights. This lesson gives us an overview as to how Nelson Mandela, along with others, carved their way to a society where there will be no discrimination on the basis of their color, caste, race, age, or gender. Now let's look at the chapter in detail. Long Walk to Freedom. 10th May dawned. Dawned means began. Bright and clear. For the past few days, I had been pleasantly besieged. Besieged means to be surrounded by dignitaries and world leaders who were coming to pay their respects before the inauguration. The inauguration would be the largest gathering ever of international leaders on South African soil. The ceremonies took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheatre formed by the Union Buildings in Pretoria. For decades, this had been the seat of white supremacy, and now it was the site of a rainbow gathering of different colors and nations for the installation of South Africa's first democratic non-racial government. 10th May was the day when Nelson Mandela was sworn in as the first black head of state South Africa. It was after years of struggle that his anti-racist party came into power. Until then, the seat had always been occupied by white presidents. That is why the author referred the day as bright and clear. It was a morning full of hope. Days before this date, many notable personalities, they started congratulating him for his victory. For the first time in the country's history, so many international leaders came together for their inauguration ceremony. The ceremony took place in an open circular building made of sandstone consisting of Union buildings in the Pretoria city, as given in the picture. On that lovely autumn day, I was accompanied by my daughter Zanani. On the podium, Mr. De Klerk was first sworn in as second deputy president. Then, Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as the first deputy president. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the constitution and to devote myself to the well-being of the republic and its people. The author was accompanied by his daughter Zanani on his big day. First, the two vice presidents took an oath. Then, when his turn came, he committed to respect, protect, and abide by the Constitution and to devote his entire self into the welfare of the country. To the assembled guests and the watching world, I said, today, all of us do by our presence here confer means to grant, glory and hope to newborn liberty. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. We who were outlaws not so long ago have today been given the rare privilege to be the host to the nations of the world on our own soil. We thank all our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with the people of our country of what is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. In the above paragraph, the author also mentions some parts of his speech where he said that everyone by his presence was giving rise to hope for a new beginning. Previous rulers were discriminatory and lasted for long, but the ones who are given the opportunity to rule now would stand up against discrimination. He is glad to host a ceremony with the presence of global leaders. It is an achievement in itself. There was a time when South Africa, for practicing apartheid, lost all its international political relationships. Now, when there is no segregation on the basis of race and gender, other nations are happy to have healthy democratic relationships. Finally, they have come to power and they pledge to make everyone proud. He thanked everyone, especially the international leaders, for joining them in celebrating their achievement, which is a step towards an equal society where every human will be treated fairly. Moving on to the next paragraph. We have at last achieved our political emancipation. Now, emancipation means the fact or process of being set free from legal, social, or political restrictions. We pledge ourselves to liberate, means to release all our people from the continuing bondage. Bondage means the state of being a slave, bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. Now, moving on to the next paragraph. We have at last achieved our political emancipation. Now, emancipation means the fact or process of being set free from legal, social, or political restrictions. We pledge ourselves to liberate. Liberate means to free or release all our people from the continuing bondage. Bondage means the state of being a slave, of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. Reign means to rule or govern. God bless Africa. In the above paragraph, the author mentions that after great struggle, they have finally achieved political freedom. His government promised to free everyone of the still existing poverty, hardship, and inequalities of all kinds, along with assuring everyone of a country where no community will be considered inferior. He then exclaims that freedom should rule, and may God shower his blessings on their land. Now moving on to the next paragraph. A few moments later, we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets, helicopters, and troop carriers rode in perfect formation over the Union buildings. It was not only a display of pinpoint precision means accuracy, and military force, but a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected. Only moments before, the highest generals of the South African Defence Force and police, their chests bedecked means decorated, with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. I was not unmindful. Unmindful means not conscious or aware of the fact that not so many years before they would not have saluted but arrested me. Finally, a chevron means a pattern in the shape of a V, of Impala jets left a smoke trail means series or chain, of the black, red, green, blue and gold of the new South African flag. Just after the newly elected president's address to the audience, an impressive arrangement of fighter jets, helicopter and soldier transporters raised everyone's heads up in the sky. It symbolized perfection as well as military's respect and obedience towards the free country. The high commanders, who have won medals for their bravery, also saluted and promised their loyalty. Mandela mentions that he was well aware that these commanders, who were now saluting him, would have arrested him under the previous rule as during the oppressive white supremacy. He was considered to be a criminal. The air show finally ended by making of the South African flag in the sky from smoke beneath the jets. Now moving on to the next paragraph. The day was symbolized for me by playing of our two national anthems, that is one of the whites and one of the blacks. Now, although that day neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised, they would soon know the words by heart. So here he explains that he remembers, the author Nelson Mandela, he remembers the day as the playing of the two national anthems of the country, one of the whites and the other of the blacks. So on that day no one knew the wordings of the anthem of the blacks, but Mandela was very confident that everyone would soon learn this anthem that they once hated. Now moving on to the next paragraph. On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed means have a strong emotional effect, with a sense of history. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up the differences and erected means built or construct a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned people of their own land. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhumane societies the world has ever known. Now, in the last decade of the 20th century and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedoms of all peoples regardless of the color of their skin. On the day of the inaugural ceremony, the author he says that he remembers the days of the past when his whole system of apartheid emerged. It resulted in inequality and inferior treatment of dark-skinned people. They were deprived of their basic fundamental rights. As a result, one of the world's most brutal and inhumane society was born. This began even before he was born. So this system, it created an atmosphere of extreme cruelty and injustice for a particular part of the community, mainly the blacks. So now when he is in the 8th decade as a man, he along with countless others have changed this entire system that treats humans as human irrespective of their color, caste, gender or age. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. So here he explains, he tries to explain that this equal and free country was a result of sacrifices of countless other men and women who have fought all their lives for this day. The author wishes if he could thank all these patriots, if he could thank them all, but unfortunately they didn't live to see the results of their courage. Now, Nelson Mandela, he gathered his courage and power from all these people and thus he wishes to make them proud. Moving on to the next paragraph. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound means very great or intense hurt. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Thambos, the Walter Sisselers, the Chief Luthelius, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobukwe's of our time. Men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom and generosity that their like may never be known again. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. In the above paragraph, the author Nelson Mandela, he tries to explain that the oppression policy scarred many people and it will take a long time for them to move on. So he says that it's not an easy task to forget all that had happened. The author mentions that this hard time had its negative impacts, but it also exposed a lot of strong and courageous men who stood up and raised their voice. Thus, it required that level of unjust treatment to produce such great heroes. South Africa, he says, is rich in minerals and gems, but its greatest strength lies in its people. Now moving on to the next paragraph. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength and resilience Now, resilience means the ability to deal with any kind of hardship and recover from its effects. That defies means refuse to obey. The imagination. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. So here he tries to explain that Nelson Mandela gained his strength to stand against the wrong from all the great nationalists he mentioned above, who have ever risked, who had even risked their lives for freedom and tolerated ill treatment, but never stopped fighting. He learned that courage didn't mean the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome fear. The man who overcomes his fear is called brave. Now, the next paragraph. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Even in the grimace means very serious or gloomy times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer means shine, of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but can never be extinguished. So here he tries to explain that one is taught by its society to hate humans because of their skin, color, age, gender, and religion. And he says that no one is inborn with hatred. The author's idea is that if people can be taught hatred, they can also be taught love and brotherhood. In their most testing times in prison, when they were being treated brutally, Mandela would see a pinch of humanity and kindness in one of the guards, and that was enough to keep him going. He believes that goodness in human beings can be suppressed, but they can never be eliminated. Okay, now the next paragraph. In life, every man has twin obligation. Now, obligation means a duty or a commitment to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children, and he has an obligation to his people, his community, his country. Now, in a civil and humane society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth, means of Nelson Mandela's birth, and color to fulfill both of those obligations. In South Africa, a man of color, means a black, who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family and his home and was forced to live a life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. I did not in the beginning choose to place my people above my family, but in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father, and a husband. Moving on to the last paragraph of this chapter, I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice. Now, prejudice means a strong dislike without any good reason, and narrow-mindedness. I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. So here in this paragraph, he mentions that the need to free the oppressor is as high as that of the oppressed, because the oppressor is bounded by the shackles of hatred. He has the weight of all the people who he has tormented, for he carries the curses of all of their families. For taking away someone else's freedom and making them a prisoner, he becomes a prisoner of biasness. Thus, he is robbed of his humanity and need to be freed. Now, let's have a look at the summary of this chapter. This chapter is an extract from the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, who was born on 18 July 1918, the first black president of South Africa. This chapter begins with a description of their inaugural ceremony, which took place on the 10th of May 1994, where the entire nation, along with many international leaders, embraced the victory of a newly and fairly elected government. It involved speeches by the president and the two deputy presidents, followed by an impressive air show of fighter jets and helicopters. Long ago, in the first decade of the 20th century, white supremacy introduced the system of apartheid and made life a living hell for the dark-skinned population. It gave rise to one of the most inhumane societies of the world. Many people have struggled and sacrificed for basic human rights. The author expressed his desire to thank all those freedom fighters who couldn't live to see this autumn day. He referred to the citizens as the greatest asset of the country. It is these people he gathered his courage from. Mandela believes that courageous is not the man who is fearless, but the man who has overcome fear. He also mentions the two responsibilities every human has and how, in order to fulfill his obligations towards a society, his obligation towards his family was neglected. He became a man of people when he realized that the idea of freedom was an illusion for him and people like him. It was then he joined the African National Congress and fought for his rights till he became the first black president of the nation. According to him, the oppressor is as much a prisoner as the oppressed. As soon as the former robs the oppressed of their freedom, he himself gets robbed of his humanity. Thus, the oppressor too is not free.